for Joseph Baba Ifa. Baba knows the way, we follow the signs. He walks with the Orisha through sacred lines. He speaks with the ancients, he honors the drum. He carries the wisdom where we all come from.
Hey family, thank you for tuning into Our Roots podcast with Joseph Baba Ifa. Where only the strongest roots see the light, brought to you by Botaniga Candles and more. And if you haven't had the opportunity, hit that like and subscribe button. Today, we are going to be continuing with our Meji series, continuing with the Odu Baba Oshe Meji. The last one we released was Baba Ifa Meji, as we continue with this next one. And like all of them, this is definitely one of my favorite ones. When we look at Baba Oshe Meji, starting with the name like we usually do, Oshe has a couple different translations. So Oshe can mean I work. Oshe can mean soap, right? Or it could also be a euphemism for Ashe. So if we analyze the translation of Oshe Meji, it means I work twice. Where this Odu has a theme where the person has to work twice as hard to get half as much as everybody else. And the reason being is because Baba Oshe Meji, when he came down from heaven, he came down in a state that was a little bit turbulent. Whether he was able to perform sacrifice or not beforehand, he came down cursed, unfortunately, where there's stories that his mother's womb was actually cursed by family members and people who didn't want her to procreate. Any of these things afflicted him, where when he arrived upon earth, he had to work twice as hard to be able to get ahead, whether it was 𝘃𝗶𝗱𝗏, ultimately initiating himself in any of the various fashions that it speaks of in this sign. It's definitely somebody that had to sacrifice for everything they had. If we look at also the translation for soap, this is an Odu, along with all the Oshes, that speaks of when soap was first prepared. Now, one of the strongest ones you're going to hear about is Odus like 𝘃𝗶𝗿𝗏 and 𝘃𝗶𝗿𝗏. They speak heavily of the preparation of soap, specifically the black soap, with the 𝗃𝗏𝗿𝗏, or the various ingredients and medicines that can go in, that could give its benefits to the client or the person utilizing it. So anybody with this Odu or any of the Oshes in general as the right leg or ese Otun should definitely utilize black soap in their routine. I think we all should as Ifa and Orisha practitioners. But apart from that, definitely get soaps prepared based on your sign. Every Odu has a soap associated with it so that you can reap those benefits, because in this Odu it speaks heavily of the soaps, utilizing it, cleansing oneself. Being that Baba Oshe Meji is a medium, is somebody that has a high level of spiritual aptitude and IQ. And even if they don't come into trance, definitely somebody that has the capabilities to be able to see, hear, feel, and be in contact with that other dimension. And finally, Baba Ashe Meji makes reference to twice as many blessings. We're going to get into a pataki now, that we're ultimately going to cite as well in another video that we're going to be making on the concept of Ashe in general. But Baba Ashe Meji speaks of when the Orishas were first manifesting in the universe. Olodumare had created them, and they were all going for divination to receive their life destiny, reading, and who they were meant to be within the cosmic aspect of Ifa. Now, all of the Orishas went for divination, and were told to perform sacrifice, right? Now, when they performed sacrifice, they were told to hang on to the head, specifically, of the animal that they were going to be offering, right? So they offered different things based on their preferences, etc. But it speaks of the other Orishas having enough money to be able to offer four-legged sacrifice. So Orunmila decided it was his turn to go receive divination and see what his destiny wanted from him. Now, in his specific case, when Baba Oshe Meji was revealed, he was told to perform sacrifice with 2 hens, right? When he offered the sacrifice of the 2 hens to Ifa, he was instructed the same thing, hang on to the head, right? So when the time came for Olodumare's reunion to see who was going to be the king of Orisha or who was going to receive these accolades, all of the Orishas showed up well-dressed. They didn't hang on to anything from the 𝗃𝗏 like they were told. But Orunmila came, decently dressed. He was presentable, but he wasn't wearing jewelry or designer or anything like that. And he showed up, but he had his heads in hand, right? So when the time came and Olodumare said, I'm going to make my selection, he told everybody to pull out whatever they had to offer. Now, the other Orishas came with no offerings. They didn't come with any gifts. And the Odu Baba Oshe Meji is why you really shouldn't arrive at people's homes empty-handed. But Orunmila was prepared, and he actually pulled out the hen heads that he was able to afford and offer and give, and he showed them to Olodumare. He said, this is what I have left from the 𝗃𝗏. And Olodumare looked at him and said, you will be the king of Orisha. You will be the one who guides all the others, being that you were the only one who was obedient to Ifa, following instruction. And apart from that, to be able to realize the life reading you're going to provide to your disciples, you do not have to offer four-legged animals. So that's a nice little attribute that Orunmila has. So, for example, for the people who have gone through Hand of Ifa and whatnot from the Lukumi standpoint, depending on different aspects of 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗏, there are clans who offer a four-legged animal. There are clans who do not. But within the Lukumi practice, it's pretty commonplace to not see any four-legged animals in the Hand of Ifa process. This Odu explains why Orunmila is the only Orisha that is able to offer a life divination without receiving a four-legged animal. It's pretty obvious to see if you've ever walked by an Orisha house, multiple four-legged animals outside, because to be able to reveal the Odu of that life reading, there has to be a four-legged animal that's offered to that Orisha. So Orunmila was able to be, at the apex of the Orisha pyramid, offering much less than everybody. Even though he didn't have the funds to be able to offer the four-legged animal, he did have the obedience to offer what he could afford and hang on to what he needed to, because he was more focused on spirituality and the essence of Ifa, rather than saying, hey, I offered this, I deserve this, I look like this, give me what, I think I deserve. And Olodumare was expecting the complete opposite. So this Odu is a reiteration within Ifa of humility. If we reference back to 𝗃𝗶𝗸𝗁, remember that Orunmila arrived late because he performed 𝗃𝗏, and the only thing that was left for him was the head of the fish, which he was eating out of the garbage. And when Olodumare or 𝗃𝗶𝗸𝗏, depending how you interpret it, saw him eating it, he said, head you eat, head you shall be. So this is one of those things, or sleight of hands, that God placed in front of him to see if he was going to conduct himself accordingly, which Orunmila always did. So, known as Baba Oshe Meji. Now, another interesting aspect of that pataki also makes reference to the 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗏s. Even though it refers to the heads, the heads technically are a part of Ashe. So, being that Orunmila hung on to the 𝗃𝗏𝗍, or the Ashe of the head, he became king of Orisha in this Odu, because Orunmila is an Orisha, just like the other ones. He just manifests differently from person to person. So this is another reason why the ceremonial parts of the Orisha are removed, where the muscle is left for us, and then the intestines, and well, not the intestines, because those are for the 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗏 or the 𝗃𝗏𝗍, but the points of the body and specific aspects or organs, or offal of the animal, are offered as Ashe. And this is one of the Odus, along with Baba Ifa Meji, that explains why these things have to be present to be able to realize an Ita. This Odu speaks heavily of the Ita process, and all the things that need to be present for it to be revealed as a life reading. So, interesting stuff for sure. Now, with Baba Oshe Meji, there has consistently been a highly debated theme within the Lukumi tradition, as far as, if the Odu is revealed, can the person practice within the Orisha that it's revealed? So this Odu speaks heavily of both oracles, but very heavily of the Erindilogun oracle. It's actually one of the Odus where it first manifested. This Odu speaks of when the 𝗃𝗏s, or the 𝗃𝗏 Orisha, because any 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗏, the Babalawo, if he's initiated an Orisha, can persist upon consulting with the Erindilogun. In the Lukumi tradition, we abstain based on what the Odu 𝗃𝗶𝗍 said when the shell became inconvenient. But it speaks in general of when people would perform consultations, whether it was with Opele or whether it was with the Erindilogun. But we're going to focus more on the Caracol here because the point is within the Caracol. So they would do the divinations, right? But they would do them for free. So people would receive the advice of Ifa and Orisha. They would get their 𝗿𝗶𝗍𝗲 done for free, and they would benefit. And it gave some satisfaction to the priest, but satisfaction really isn't enough when you're a head of household and you have a partner, children, bills, necessities. So it started causing a lot of friction within the priest's home, or Oshe Meji's home. So he went for divination with other priests to be able to reveal what it was that was occurring. And the Odu of Baba Oshe Meji was revealed within Ifa, ultimately, because the Meji only exists within Ifa, not within Erindilogun or Orisha, which is a singular Odu, compared to the double Odu, which is Ifa, which is simultaneous, actually. So when Baba Oshe Meji was revealed, the Awos looked at Oshe Meji and said, what do you do with your money? You know, what do you do with the cowrie shell? Like, are you organized? Like, what are you doing? And he said, no, I do everything for free because that's what I swore to do. I swore to, save humanity. And apart from that, I actually give away the cowrie shells, or I put them back into the 𝗿𝗶𝗸𝗏 so that, I don't want to make anything off of Ifa. And the Awos looked at him and were a little, horrified, because they said, well, how are you going to live? How are you going to provide? The money from the 𝗿𝗶𝗍𝗏 is meant for the priest who performed it. We're not here to throw away the money. So at that point, Baba Oshe Meji had to start being compensated for all the fabulous work he did, because he was a results-based and driven awo. And, some people were like, oh my God, how dare you charge us? But they were manipulators anyway, so he was happy to get rid of them. Or some people understood, hey, I'm benefiting from this process. You need to be compensated. So what happens is there's two ways to interpret the cowrie shell. The first one originally was actually when it was utilized as currency. That's why it's known as owo, right? And then you have the other aspect, which the Sodu speaks of it along with 𝘃𝗏𝗏, of where the cowrie shell was used for divination, right? So when Baba Oshe Meji is revealed in the hand of Ifa, ironically, it doesn't prohibit the initiate from anything. The person, if they'd like, can become, an 𝗿𝗶𝗸𝗏𝗏 or an 𝗿𝗶𝗸𝗏𝗏 and use the cowrie shell as their primary form of division for a career. But it also says that the person, if they choose, can become babalawo if they have the characteristics necessary, because it speaks of the divination with Opele as well. But as such, Oshe Meji does not limit anyone within Ifa whatsoever. But ironically, when we look at, possibly the misadministered form of reading the Erindilogun within our Lukumi system, or the tonti system as it's known, when Oshe tonti Oshe is revealed, the first thing everybody wants to do is say, okay, estás cerrado en este Orisha. You're closed in this Orisha. This Orisha doesn't want you to give it away, because in this sign, Baba Oshe Meji, the person would give away the shell. Now, it's not that they would, when you interpret it, they would give away the money, but they would also give the Orisha away for free. So it was misinterpreted within the Erindilogun system from a Lukumi standpoint that when Oshe Tonti Oshe or Oshe Meji was revealed, that this Orisha didn't want to be given away by the person. It doesn't want the person being able to do anything with it. Now, here's the thing. Oshe is a singular Odu. When we look at a consultation process within the shell, the first Odu is supposed to be revealed, ideally, if the person's an initiate or a priest, by the person, right? That's the Odu that matters. The first Odu, because that's the Odu that Ori is revealing within Erindilogun. That's what Orisha is saying at that moment. But what occurred in our system, being that they say the Awos of Ifa arrived after the priests of Orisha, and being that a lot of the original shell throwers were women, and some of them were actually married to babalaos and knew the Ifa oracle pretty intensely as well, that they tried to translate it into the shell so that it would not be lost, because they didn't know if they were going to find these gentlemen hidden, in whatever cave they were while they were being hunted. So when they come over, they incorporate this system where you see most of the time now, unfortunately, for other than some coherent brothers who are really delving and studying and doing their own anthropological research, when the shell is manifested, Ifa is spoken rather than Orisha. Orisha has its own literature. It has its own vernacular. It's similar, but it's quite different as well, where, you know, you might see a pataki in an Odu like 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗁𝗏, and that same pataki you'll see in the Odu of Ashe, in the Erindilogun. It's just that they manifested at different times, dimensions, timelines, however you want to interpret it. But ultimately, it's an incoherency, and it ends up becoming quite confusing, because let's say someone comes with 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗁𝗏, right, and in the shell, or 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗏𝗏, and they want to speak it as if it's 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗏 and Ifa, when in reality, the only Odu that has revealed itself there is Ashe, which speaks heavily differently than 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗏 or Ashe anything else, because what was revealed by the Ori of the person is Ashe. Now, where does this become more pertinent is when we're basically, you know, shutting somebody down with an Orisha, because I've seen numerous cases where someone will come with 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗏𝗃 within an Orisha, and let's say they crowned Oshun, right? And they come with 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗏𝗃 and Oshun, and then automatically they're like, nope, you're not meant to work Orisha. You can't initiate anybody. You can't throw the shell. You can't do anything. Your Orishas are there to be adored, and you have to outsource everything. So basically, just sit down and enjoy life. And you have some people who are okay with that, because some people do Orisha or whatever they do for themselves, and they just want to honor their deities and, you know, go about life, whether it's their career, their family, etc. But you have other people who have attained this license to be able to work and pursue a career as an Ifa Orisha professional. So a misinterpretation such as that could literally destroy someone's whole life. And that's why I think this point needs to be made, because it's a hotly debated topic. I'm not necessarily sure why it's so debated, because it's pretty clear that, you know, this was an adaptation that, you know, we used as a survival technique. It functioned while it needed to. But, you know, most 𝗃𝗏𝗃 brothers that I work with or that I speak to, you know, they tell me, they're like, yeah, the second throw is a ghost throw. Because ironically, that throw is administered or takes place without distributing 𝗃𝗏𝗏, right? Now, if it was, you know, something, you know, that was ultimately legitimate, you'd see both of those signs fall at the same time, which is impossible, because then you'd have to have two hands of shells dropping on two separate mats. It's just not feasible. So the reason that the ghost throw that the 𝗃𝗏𝗃 does there is to be able to amplify Ita. And the reason that was incorporated is because the information of the Erindilogun didn't arrive in Cuba with the ferocity that the Odu of Ifa did. So now that we're living in a different time where, you know, I mean, in my personal library, I have at least 10 pataki per Odu of Orisha. Just for, okay, these are the stories from Ogunda, not Ogunda Meji, right? So when we're living in this information age, and when we're able to fraternize with our brothers and sisters in Africa, and now be able to find all of these, you know, documents and articles that have been tucked away, even within Cuba, there's really no reason to incorporate this, because the only thing I've seen is necessarily confusion and misguidance. But neither here nor there. Everybody manifests how they choose within their home. But these are the facts. This is what is actually documented and recognized. Because if it was another thing, you know, they would touch this shell to the head once again and pull out another Odu to create a composite one. But Orisha is so intense and so strong, it only needs one Odu, you know. So very key points about this Odu, so that anybody that's in that situation has all of the information necessary to make the best decisions for their own spiritual well-being, which is the most important thing. Now, piggybacking on that theme, there's another aspect of this sign which is really interesting, because in this sign was where Orunmila and Oshun had a son, right? And when they gave him the hand of Ifa, he came with the Odu of Baba Oshe Meji, where Ifa instructed that the son needed to undergo Orisha initiation and divination with the shell of Orisha to be able to save his life, because he was actually going through a phenomenon within his health. So Oshun looked at Orunmila and said, hey, initiate him. And he said, I can't, because I work with Ifa. You're his mother. based on our tradition, that's not going to give the same effect. Why don't we reach out to your sister and her husband to see if they could facilitate the process? Now, Oshun's sister was 𝗀𝗻𝗃, and 𝗀𝗻𝗃 was married to Shango, who actually was a master shell diviner. He was an 𝗿𝗶𝗸𝗍. So when they went and brought their child to 𝗀𝗻𝗃, 𝗀𝗻𝗃 immediately said yes, because she adored her nieces and nephews, which there's a pataki that speaks on that in this Odu as well. And Shango was on board completely. So they actually took him through the Orisha process. They crowned him up, and Shango was the one who directed the Orisha process and functioned as 𝗿𝗶𝗸𝗍. And the boy, miraculously got better, and he had stability, where Ifa and Orisha really opened up his path and his possibilities to do whatever it is that he chose. So the interesting thing about it here is that this Odu, Baba Oshe Meji, speaks not only of the importance of initiating into Orisha, but the utilization of the Erindilogun oracle. In my humble opinion, having, perused this literature for decades, I mean, if it was something that was taboo as far as, utilizing the shell or any of these things, I don't think a pataki like that would be present in this Odu, especially pertaining to Orunmila's son, but to be interpreted and analyzed by each in their own. So, but this Odu speaks of the importance of, the person initiating. Ultimately, Baba Oshe Meji is an Odu of consecration. It's an Odu where the person has to go through more intense and in-depth initiation rites from a priesthood standpoint to be able to alleviate the curse with which they were born. Because Oshe Meji, from the moment they were born, was envied. So it's saying that the person, hand of Ifa definitely, Orisha would be ideal. And once again, if the person has the desire or want, they can become 𝗿𝗶𝗸𝗍 or 𝗿𝗶𝗸𝗍, which is the other point here. Baba Oshe Meji actually tells the person that they should throw the shell as much as possible. So if the Odu of Ifa of Baba Oshe Meji is saying that, for any Odu of the shell to say otherwise is somewhat incoherent, especially being that, once again, Oshe Meji or Oshe Tonti Oshe actually doesn't exist. But when we look at this Odu, it also speaks heavily of the relationship between 𝗀𝗻𝗃 and Oshun. This is the famous Odu in Pataki where Oshun was a woman. She was a young mother, and not everybody assimilates motherhood the same way. As far as her maturation process, it's really spoken of here, where Oshun went from being, a late teenager, early 20s mother, adolescent, immature, and growing into womanhood. And the woman who helped facilitate that was her older sister, 𝗀𝗻𝗃. And Oshun would leave her children with 𝗀𝗻𝗃 because she recognized that 𝗀𝗻𝗃 was one of the best examples of maternity in existence. And apart from that, 𝗀𝗻𝗃 had actually played a huge role in raising Oshun herself. And 𝗀𝗻𝗃, once again, loved her nieces and nephews. She's like, you can leave them with me as much as you want, because she was more of a homebody. She was home with her husband, Shango. They were all family. And they loved each other a lot. But Oshun would go out, right? And 𝗀𝗻𝗃 would stay with her nieces and nephews, raise them as if they were her own. But she noticed that there would be stretches of days where Oshun wouldn't come back for her kids. Now, mind you, it didn't bother 𝗀𝗃 because of the children, but, she had a relationship as well. She had desires as well. And she really, wanted to create a healthy, situation for her children, her nieces and nephews, etc. So she needed Oshun to come pick up her kids, you know what I'm saying? And, Oshun would disappear, come back, but there was a time when Oshun didn't come back for a while. And 𝗀𝗃 kind of noticed, like, where is my sister? She actually started getting worried, like, is she alive? Is she not? And she went to visit 𝗿𝗶𝗸𝗍. And Ifa told her with the Odu of Baba Oshe Meji to leave the 𝗵𝗶𝗸𝗍 at her front door. So at that moment, when she was walking out her front door to leave the 𝗵𝗶𝗸𝗍 to kind of identify what was going on, she thought it was odd, but she noticed a woman walking by. And when she looked at the woman twice, she said, Oshun, is that you? And Oshun was wearing a wig. Oshun was wearing a lot of makeup. Like, Oshun had completely disguised herself because Oshun had to walk past 𝗀𝗻𝗃's house to get home. And she said, yeah, it's me. She said, bro, why don't you pick up your kids? She's like, no, I feel embarrassed. Motherhood is too hard. I like to go out and this, that, and the third. And 𝗀𝗻𝗃 really, yoked Oshun up and really had to put her, on game as far as how to be a mother. That we don't always have the opportunity to get a break. We don't always have the opportunity to go out and enjoy ourselves. Everything has to be more organized, And at that point, Oshun had to reassimilate her children and go home to her husband and start leading a more conventional life. So when we look at this Odu, this Pataki is misinterpreted quite a bit because, Oshun is she's an Orisha of a lot of examples, lessons to be learned, because she really put her worst moments on Front Street or on display for us to be able to learn from them. Because the first thing everybody likes to say when Oshun, did this in this story is, oh, horrible mother, how could she, all these different things. But, there's a real learning moment here is what was Oshun going through? It could have been an episode of postpartum. It could have been a lack of support at home. It could have been, this aspect of being overwhelmed, all of these different things. Now, mind you, no one should ever have an excuse to abandon their kids. But at the same time, it's a reminder that, there has to be that support system in place as a family for new parents, to not be going through such intense moments alone, because it's already hard enough. From another aspect, it speaks of why 𝗀𝗻𝗃 is associated with maternity. She's seen as the mother of the world, and the mother Orisha, because she was always somebody that, if the children needed any support, she was there. But it was always to a limit as well. I mean, when Oshun went through this with her children and Oshe Meji, there's versions where, Shango couldn't really handle the responsibility of the 𝗵𝗍𝗍s when, he had children with Oshun, and 𝗀𝗻𝗃 would take care of them. But it speaks of why 𝗀𝗻𝗃 in this Odu really adores the person and tries to protect them as much as possible. But Ifa says that there has to be a support system in place or organization so that the person feels that they can still have a life while making sure that their children have the conditions necessary to proceed in a healthy fashion. So that's super key. In this Odu of Baba Oshe Meji, it speaks of a story where there was a slave, and the slave was a 𝗷𝗸𝗍𝗲, and he was going through a hard time, obviously, being that he was now a servant, and he wanted to better himself. He wanted to find a way to be able to get his freedom back. So he actually performed divination, and the Odu of Baba Oshe Meji was revealed, where Ifa told him to perform sacrifice to his Ori, or to his head. And when he did that, the overseer, or the slave master, actually walked in on him and said, what the hell are you doing? He said, no, I'm making offerings to my Ori so that it could help me gain my freedom. Now, in that moment, they were going to, reprimand and assault the slave. But the slave looked at him and said, the king's wife is pregnant, isn't she? And the guy looked at him and said, how do you know that? He said, I don't only know that, I know that she's been in labor for the past couple days, and if she doesn't give birth right now, she's going to die. Because all of that had come out in the reading. So the slave master looked at him and said, I'll be right back. And he went running to the king and he said, hey, is the queen still going through that? He's like, yeah, she's not looking good. He said, well, I have a slave that's like a shaman, because I guess they didn't know what 𝗷𝗸𝗍𝗲 was. He's like, he says he can fix the problem right now, because if not, she's going to die. And the king was like, bring him to me. So they brought Oshe Meji to the castle and introduced him to the king, and the king said, get to work, but make a mistake and you're dead. He said, don't worry, you'll have a prince soon, because the king was trying to have an heir. So Baba Oshe Meji basically performed 𝗵𝗶𝗍𝗶 to the woman that was pregnant. This is one of the Odus that speaks of why pregnant women, or as upon the moment of conception that we're aware of it, we need to get some work done to ensure a proper delivery. And when he did the 𝗵𝗶𝗍𝗶, it alleviated whatever negativity was blocking the prince from being born, and she was able to release the baby and deliver the baby, and it was a boy. And the king looked at the slave and said, what can I offer you? You've given me the greatest joy. You saved my life. You saved my wife and you saved my son, and you've saved this kingdom. He said, I just want my freedom. I just want to be independent, and go about my days. And he said, I'm going to do one better. He said, not only are you free, but you're going to be my personal 𝗿𝗲𝗍. And Baba Oshe Meji was not only able to get his freedom, but probably the best position in his land and in his village. So this Odu speaks of the importance of always recalling that even if we're in negative situations, Ifa has an answer. Whether it's Ori, with the things we manifest, not losing sight of who we are and what our goals are, because even in the horrible position the slave was in, he's still like, I want to have my Ifa practice and I want to have my own establishment and have a life. And he was able to do that. And it also, once again, reiterates the importance of getting spiritual work done when the woman is identified as expecting. Now, my personal routine when it came to, facilitating, my children's birth and whatnot was, I always do annual things regardless. So I always recommend everybody doing it both from their sign on an annual basis, which is one of the things I recommend to any pregnant woman, obviously. And then apart from that, a divination for the year in which we're expecting and making sure all those things get done. We also want to make sure that pregnant women are not overindulging red palm oil spiritually. Like, it shouldn't be present in the 𝗃𝗍𝗍, because they say that red palm oil, being that it's associated with menses, metaphorically, could actually cause miscarriage, right, or abortion. So very important ingredient to stay away from. I usually recommend that they replace it with shea butter, which is much more conducive and facilitative of a proper delivery for the child. So a really nice story there. Baba Oshe Meji also speaks of money. Once again, it's one of the Odus that was actually recognized as being, the wealthiest. I think the war, the war of the riches was between Baba Otura Meji and Baba Oshe Meji. Another really important fact to note here is that Baba Irete Meji and Baba Oshe Meji are actually enemies. This Odu states, of friction and, misunderstandings between those two Odus. So it's not that they can't be around each other, but they definitely have to know how to, interact and play nice and mingle. Because by nature, these two Odus, even though they live together within, the cosmology of Ifa from an order standpoint, they actually don't get along very much. So they're kind of like two neighbors that just don't get along. Where this Odu speaks of the importance of getting along with your neighbors, your community, trying not to disturb the peace, so that, the person can have stability and not be at war with their surroundings. Because ironically, Baba Oshe Meji is actually a pretty aggressive Odu. This Odu speaks of martial arts, the arts of combat and war. Baba Oshe Meji was actually a very well-accomplished wrestler. This is one of the Odus that actually speaks of the indigenous martial arts of Africa. And he was very, very, very talented. And they say when he arrived on Earth and he went through his training and started competing in any of the various city-states of Nigeria, he was victorious time and time and time again. And he ended up going down as the greatest combatant and fighter in the history of Nigeria, right? Or in the history of Ifa on Earth. Because they say that in heaven, Baba Odi Meji held that claim. So, mind you, time goes on. And Baba Oshe Meji went for divination with Orunmila. Now, when this occurred, Baba Oshe Meji was revealed in his initiation, where Ifa said it was taboo for him to hit people or to strike people or engage in combat. And he said, well, that's really difficult because that's how I make my living. And Orunmila looked at him and said, well, you're getting closer to like 35, 40. Ideally, you should be fighting less. Maybe you can find other ways to be lucrative within your industry without putting yourself at risk. And basically, Baba Oshe Meji's fighting career was over, but he didn't want to accept it. And in this Odu, after Orunmila told him to maybe start training people, promoting, I don't know, he continued fighting. And in the next fight, Eshu, based on Baba Oshe Meji's disobedience, actually facilitated him, getting paralyzed. Maybe he was body slammed, he got punched the wrong way, wrestled, what have you, and it left him basically incapacitated to the point where he was unable to be mobile or maneuver anymore. And ultimately, he succumbed to that and died. This Odu speaks of the importance of knowing when to stop. Baba Oshe Meji is a very talented person. It's literally Baba Ashe Meji. The person has two blessings. But you have to know how to utilize them, because Baba Oshe Meji was somebody that wanted to continue entering into combat, throwing his weight around, wanted to, be in friction with people or be able to, dominate them. And ultimately, he succumbed because of that ambition. This 𝗀𝗲𝗍 says that we have to know when to bow out gracefully. I mean, you see this time and time again with fighters and whatnot. You have really great, like I always think of the UFC now, being that it's kind of taken over combat sports. Boxing is great, but, there's things there. But when you look at like UFC and you see this amazing fighter like Silva or even Conor McGregor or even, a huge guy that I was a fan of and still am, Israel Adesanya, who's Yoruba, by the way. I'll never forget, I was watching the fight. I forgot what fight he lost, but I knew at that moment things were changing in his career. And I was watching it with my sons, and I looked and I said, I think he's going to lose this fight, guys. And my sons had a complete uproar. They're like, how dare you get out of the room? I got kicked out. I came back in. And I said, I think he's going to, I said, how old is he? He's like, no, I think he was over 30 at the time. And I said, I think he's done. And no. And he actually lost the fight. And they looked at me and said, how do you know he was going to lose the fight? I said, well, here's the thing. He's famous. He's famous beyond comparison. He's got like 5 million, subscribers on Instagram or whatever. I heard he's about to start doing movies. I heard, and I mean, over 30, a man starts thinking about, starting a family and whatnot. He has so many things going on. How much time does he really have to be in the gym? And then apart from that, he's a little older now. And they were like, no, you watch. He's going to come back again. And I don't know if it was against 𝗀𝗏𝗍𝒻 or whoever. I don't think he had a good result there either. And it makes me really think back to this 𝗀𝗲𝗍, because Baba Oshe Meji speaks of the anxiety that athletes or professionals from highly intense, careers go through when they retire, right? You see it with football players. You see it where, unless they have something to replace that first passion with, it could actually be extremely detrimental to the point where they could, develop a bunch of other situations. So all he had to do was, learn how to shift into another space, And I think that applies not only to athletes, but to everyone in general. Like, let's say you're a police officer and you're used to walking the beat, making arrests, saving the day. Eventually, the office, awaits you, or maybe a position within the force that's a little more exalted, and that's difficult for some people to go from one part of the arena to the other. And it happens even within Ifa. I mean, the day after tomorrow, what aspects am I going to ultimately have to delegate? Because at some point you have to let somebody else hold the staff, and begin to empower those around you. Because everything changes, it's a young man's game to a certain degree. So Baba Oshe Meji speaks of all these things. But for anybody with this 𝗀𝗲𝗍 as well, please be very careful if you're doing any combat sports or anything laborious, because, the person either fell on their neck or suffered an injury that greatly, incapacitated them from a mobile standpoint. So you have to be very, very careful when it comes to that. Baba Oshe Meji is definitely one of the more popular of the 16. It's spoken about a lot. It's known about quite a bit. Baba Oshe Meji is always kind of identified with the blood. When we look at it, and this is more within the Erindilogun, it says, sangre que corre por la vena o que fluye por la vena. It says blood flows through the veins. Now, this makes reference to a bunch of different things. Now, this 𝗀𝗲𝗍 is one of the first that speaks of blood diseases, anything from diabetes to a virus such as HIV, any of the things that can intoxicate our blood, even a sepsis, right? All of those things are spoken of here. But when we look at the metaphor of blood as well, and DNA and family and relatives, unfortunately, this 𝗀𝗲𝗍 speaks of the conflict that Baba Oshe Meji experienced with his family. And Baba Oshe Meji was always somebody that was trying to help people, do well by people, and help his family. But they were very envious of him because he was a very prosperous guy. He would make a lot of money. He was a very happy guy. And because of it, they started cursing him. Now, he started feeling the effects. Same spiel, went for divination to see what was going on. But he was really shocked by what the 𝗿𝗏𝗍 had to tell him, because he basically told him, your family is your worst enemy. You know, the closer you are to them, the further you're going to be from your destiny. And he didn't want to believe it. He lived in complete denial. But the more he persisted upon his family, he noticed the worse and worse and worse things were getting. And, you know, one day he decided, you know, I'm going to do what the 𝗿𝗏𝗍 says, and I'm going to lean back and kind of disappear. And he noticed that when he relocated, got around a new group of people, started a relationship, things started going wonderfully for him. So one day he decided to go back and see his family, or go back to where he was from, and he started feeling the same effects again, and he realized this was my problem all along. Now, mind you, he couldn't eliminate his family per se. You know, he had a mother, a father, you know, he had relatives, but he would do things from an auxiliary standpoint. Hey, Mom, how are you doing? No, come over. No, I just zelled you $100, you know, or here's, you know, go on a vacation with Dad, or, you know, hey, this is for you guys. Like, he would do it from a distance now, because he noticed that the more he would integrate himself, the worse things would go for him. So that's why it says, sangre que corre por la vena. This is why the Orisha Oshun is so huge here. This is why the Orisha 𝗿𝗏𝗍𝗶𝗍 or 𝗵𝗏𝗍𝗍 is so huge here, because they are the Orishas that are really associated with the blood, right? So obviously have good habits here. Be careful with food poisoning. Be careful with any type of infections. Be careful using a knife. Unfortunately, it also speaks of issues within the circulatory system, which are in direct correlation to blood, obviously. You know, the transferring of oxygen, hemoglobin, iron, all the things that our blood carries, and the importance of it. Egungun is huge here, for sure. Baba Oshe Meji also has to be very careful with his relationship, specifically with his mother. This is an 𝗏𝗏𝗿 where a very unfortunate occurrence happened, where Baba Oshe Meji was born. I think it's kind of similar to the Moses story, where he got lost in the river. He was adopted by another family. He grew up not knowing his original parents, you know, and somehow he ended up actually going back to his homeland, where he actually, you know, had an encounter with his mother unknowingly. So it's an 𝗏𝗏𝗿 that speaks of why this is taboo. But this 𝗏𝗏𝗿 speaks of the importance of having healthy relationships with our parents and our relatives and our partners, so that things are never toxic, because, you know, more than likely nothing like that will ever happen. But it speaks more metaphorically, where, you know, we cannot allow anyone outside of our relationship to have a direct influence on our relationship. So it's about educating our parents, educating our children, always putting our relationship first, so that we can have longevity. Because if Baba Oshe Meji is not careful, their family or relatives could destroy their relationship and leave them in a state of misery, because no one's going to love them like their partner, right? Baba Oshe Meji is a beautiful 𝗏𝗏𝗿. It speaks of a lot of prosperity. It says that Baba Oshe Meji lived a very long time on earth, right? And because of it, you know, was very affluent, did a slew of Ifa initiations. There's a bunch of storied, you know, 𝗿𝗏𝗍𝗍s that have had this 𝗏𝗏𝗿. You know, I've heard of 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗏𝗃, Juanito Angulo, you know, just gentlemen with this 𝗏𝗏𝗿 that really made it shine. So if you're lucky enough to have this one in initiation, whether it's Hand of Ifa or as Babalawo, it's definitely one that you can shine in and accomplish quite a bit, as long as we study, prepare ourselves, and really live the essence of Ifa, which is what this is talking about. So, guys, definitely shout out to all of our members and all the people that are watching. You know, a couple closing thoughts before we go ahead and disconnect. 𝗿𝗏𝗿𝗏𝗿𝗏𝗿s is up and running for all your service and product needs. We do ship. There's a couple great things going on within our organization now, whether it's the classes such as the Moyuba class or the 4-week curriculum going over various topics within Ifa. We actually have a workshop/gala that is going to be occurring very soon. We're going to be posting information about that. Now, really special because it's going to be a scenario where people are going to be able to come. I believe it's a 48-hour process. You're going to see a live Ifa divination. We're going to go over various things. We're going to go over herbs. We're going to go over Ifa practice. It's going to culminate with a nice gala gathering where we'll be able to mingle and talk with everybody who took the time to come and visit us here in Orlando. We're really excited about that. So 𝗃𝗲𝗍𝗶 is going to be putting out a bunch of information as well. You can catch the podcast on any of the audio platforms, Spotify, Apple, any of them, in case you're driving and you can't watch us. Be sure to, like, comment, share, and subscribe. And until next time, guys, a big thank you from us, and be sure to see the light.
Baba Joseph showed the path today. Baba knows the way, we follow the signs. He walks with the Orisha through sacred lines. He speaks with the ancients, he honors the drum. He carries the wisdom where we all come from.